Are you ready, kids?
Hello, it's Employee a Million, and welcome back to SpongeComs. Today's episodes are Season 2, Episode 12, or Episode 32 overall, Pressure and the Smoking Peanut, both of which originally aired on Nickelodeon on May 12th, 2001. I really love one episode, even though I know it's not especially popular for some reasons, and I'm not a big fan of the other, but I do respect its qualities, so this is going to be my whole range for season 2, so enjoy. Pressure was written by Jay Linder, William Reese, and David Fane, or David B. Fane, as she's written in this episode. And this is his last appearance in Okay, my cat has just come into the room. This was David B. Fane's last writing credit. What do you want? You want to join into this conversational episode? Because this is very conversation heavy. I do really like how they point out that this is how clouds look. It's a very observational gag that I really like them doing at this point in the show. And even though this is very conversation heavy, I still very much respect the structure of this episode and how each scene builds upon one another. I think that this is very cleverly written as a SpongeBob episode of this sort of quality, a very laid back one for the most part that just snowballs into this big adventure to land. That's another thing I want to bring up later. And SpongeBob also makes fun of Sandy's little acorn emblem on her suit, which I think that she just got this season. I don't think she had that in season 1. I think they added that in season 2. Something I also really want to point out about this episode is that it feels like one of the last times that they present an action scene or a chase scene with action music, like 50s car chase music. After this, they start using Hawaiian sounding music, which does certainly keep within the spirit of SpongeBob, but I don't know, there's a novelty to these early episodes having this sort of vibe to their more action-heavy moments. But I think early installment stuff aside, I do really like a lot of the jokes they make. I like that SpongeBob and Sandy are still friends throughout all of this, but they are kind of taking the bickering a bit far. I think that leads to a very interesting conflict. This episode does share similar themes to Squirrel Jokes in that Sandy is on one side, she is a minority, for lack of a better term, and this is very tough to watch today. That little panning shot. I don't know what's made the Krusty Krab so glowy there. But no, I do really like that there is something in here, but it's just childish enough of an argument. It's just a playground argument stretched out across 5 minutes if you really have to look for any commentary or analysis in this. It's just kind of showing how such a attitude, a temperament, can lead to something more dangerous. And there are a few ways you can look at this. Obviously, the thing is Sandy being the only land animal in this argument, which, yeah, and she is the only girl in this argument as well, so also the only one voiced by a girl in this episode, now that I think of it, so yeah, really does show the strengths and weaknesses of both these different types of creatures in SpongeBob, but doesn't get too heavy-handed. It's still about slapstick and fun and just having a little quip or two, like that little high-five bit with SpongeBob. Something I do find very odd about one of the gags in this episode of SpongeBob reproducing by budding, which is what real life sponges do, he does give birth to 3 children, and the first children gives birth to another one, so where did they go? SpongeBob is a father now, and who the heck knows where they went? Maybe to Kenya. And something I really do like about this gag with Mr. Krabs here, that he can retract his eyes, and he says that everyone in his family can do that. Some species of whale can actually retract their eyes. That is a nice attention to detail, and I think that might have been added by Steven Hillenburg. I'd hate to be wrong about something like that, but it's too coincidental, man. But recently, Jay Linder has been sharing deleted scenes in the form of storyboards in these episodes, and one of them, which could either be from this episode or the Alaskan Bullworm episode later in the season, was of SpongeBob extending his tongue through his holes. And I think that might have been from this episode, and it was probably taken out because there were already a few cartoonish, over-the-top gags presented, and maybe just we needed a more scientifically accurate one for this whole thing to make more sense. And this right here is a particularly dark moment in the early episodes. I'd wager it's probably one of the 5 darkest scenes of the first 3 seasons. And the reason I say that is because even though this show is set underwater, they never really bring up the fear of drowning until now, and I can imagine this X-ray shot of Sandy's lungs drying up could have produced some nightmares. Like, it isn't out of the question that people do attain some personality traits from things they watch growing up, so I think that this could have inspired some hydrophobia, unfortunately. And I can see why people have a bit of an issue with this part of the episode, because it's very blatant that the guys are going overboard. They've really shown their sea superiority at this point, but at least the tables are now turned on them. Sandy is now in charge, and she is going to show them that land isn't so hunky-dory either. And that brings me into probably the thing about this episode that I don't think is appreciated anymore 20 years later, but it is very odd seeing SpongeBob and the gang going on land and treating it like this big event, because they've gone on land several times before. Off the top of my head, I can think of the first and second movies and the 20th anniversary special and Rodeo Days and several other little bits and bobs, roller cowards also, and it just doesn't seem very special anymore, but when this episode was new, it was pretty dang special to see these characters go up on land. There we have SpongeBob recapping the second movie, and I think that is the catch with novelty-based episodes in long-running shows, is that eventually they will seem tame or irrelevant by the rest of the show's standards, and some of these shots just under the land do look very green screeny, chroma keyed, and I do really like the shadows in those last ones, because if season 2 was cell animated, God, I really wish it was. I think that's what it would have looked like with those drop shadows. Accidental, sure, but... And here's where the budget runs out, for lack of a better term. This is their very first time up on the Bikini Bottom Island, and it's just this live-action puppet show with all the characters being these little toys on sticks. And when I was a kid, and still to an extent today, I just find it hilarious that live action to these cartoon characters is just so low budget and so unlike them, it just works. For some comedy, you don't really need a thorough explanation. But I also like how, after this, the stakes still rise. We see this horrifying little plastic Squidward octopus thing with the eyes and the bulbous nose. If octopi really looked like that, we would not be surviving as a species. But then we also get this bit of action near the end. After such a conversational first 2 acts of the episode, it's very bizarre seeing actual action take place that isn't the inciting chase scenes or running contests, races. Yeah. I like how Sandy is pretty much in the nude here. It's weird. But, yeah, you need this ending to be as weird as possible for people to not think too hard about what social commentary there probably is in this episode and just think of it as this nice closed playground argument with SpongeBob SquarePants characters. This is still a highlight of Season 2 for me. I think that this is a very smart episode in terms of how it handles its comedy, and I just really like it. Sometimes you don't need to be super analytical with or something. It's just a very witty, very interesting episode for its time period, and I still really love watching it. Now we're on to the Smoking Peanut. I've gotten a few complaints about this being on my worst Season 2 episodes list. This was written by Paul Tibbett, Walt Dawn, and Mr. Lawrence. And the thing about that is that Season 2 is my favorite season of SpongeBob, so just being the 5th least good episode of the season, that's not a horrible thing in its own right. I just have a little voice in the back of my head wondering if this episode is a bit too tense, if it is a bit too unhappy to be a SpongeBob SquarePants episode, but I do totally get what they're going for. I think this is the first time we ever see the Bikini Bottom Zoo. It's very ironic that we see a zoo in the SpongeBob world, knowing how much of an environmentalist Steven Hillenburg was. But this episode does criticize one angle of what zoos are like, how one upset can completely destroy their reputation and how society perceives them. And in this case, it's a patron upsetting a gentle giant, and the story they tell with it isn't super funny, super heartwarming, but I still totally get it now that I'm older. But it's still not one I go to for laughs or anything. I mean, it's got some great jokes, don't get me wrong. But, yeah. It's kind of weird that they chose peanuts for this. Like, you think of the title, The Smoking Peanut, that's a play on the phrase, a smoking gun. And, it's not the best analogy for a zoo episode, but yeah. One little problem I have with this episode that I'm sure does benefit it for some other people is that you hear Clamu's crying for pretty much the whole of the first 2 acts as SpongeBob goes to see his other friends. And, yeah, doesn't make the episode all too fun. Another thing that I think could be very contentious for some people, but I actually do think is one of the better things about this episode, is that Mr. Krabs is starting to get a little less of a reliable authority figure. He's just stealing from the zoo on free day. I think he steals a balloon or two, even though this is not free balloon day by any stretch of the imagination. But, yeah, he does get his just desserts, and it's like something like Jellyfish Hunter, where you can tell he's going on a downward slope, and he does pay the price at the end, and they are still able to make it witty. Like, that's the thing with more less moral Mr. Krabs episodes in the first 5 seasons is that he does get what's coming to him, and even then, they still make it feel as though there's some escalation to the jokes, so they want you to keep laughing more and more. And that frame right there is probably the most resonant part of the episode. That little frame of SpongeBob getting into his seat has been taken by memers and put into the reverse context with the phrase, "Alright, head out." It's very strange to me how it's so easy to take the exact opposite context of a joke like that, or just a little scene, and just make it so not the thing. Sorry if I'm rambling and over-articulating myself, but I just find that very fascinating how that's the exact opposite of the frame's original intent and how it's been currently perceived by the public. And I think we've just passed my least favorite scene of the episode, the little news report with all the crying and the screaming and the people covering their ears in live action on Photoshop backgrounds. I don't like watching that scene, but I do kind of get why it's there. I do get its point of showing how the news is picking up with this and making the criminal look like a complete sociopathic monster, even though SpongeBob just doesn't want to fess up to what he did. I'm still a little on the fence over whether this is an in-character thing for SpongeBob to do. I'm happy that they went with a flaw we haven't seen from this character yet after 32 episodes. And I am happy that he immediately regrets it and keeps on immediately regretting it for the rest of the episode. But it is something that I'm not sure if SpongeBob would normally do that. Like just throw a peanut at someone or something, a harmless creature. Like, if he threw it to the side of the Clamu, or threw it into the arena to give Clamu some food, it could really elevate the general things you see in zoos about not feeding the animals, and just make it something like that. I'm not saying this is just a horribly harsh portrayal of SpongeBob here, but again, I think that could have been a teensy bit more thought out. That this could have been a bigger misunderstanding. I hate when I have to say that, but I do want it to be a bigger misunderstanding. But even though I've got my issues with the story and how edgy and on edge, how tense it all is, I do really like a lot of the jokes in this episode, and they keep it from making it fully unpleasant to me. I like this weird little joke of Sandy wondering if SpongeBob has hair. She's down here for scientific purposes. I'm sure she would have come to that conclusion ages ago. But ironically, SpongeBob has shown hair several times over the course of the series. But that's not the point of this. And I do appreciate the levity that they try to present with Patrick, and making him like this hardcore detective and trying to look into the situation. And yeah, you get some good jokes like the ice cream subversion. I don't really know what else to say about this episode. I'm just gonna continue commentating over this little portion of the episode. I do sometimes see these cops on social media when there's like illegal activity and someone's making a meme out of that. And I'm sure that little shot of SpongeBob screwing his eyeballs back into his sockets is used on some Nickelodeon show announcement bumpers. But otherwise, I don't know what else to say about this episode. I do really think that Patrick thinking that he is the criminal after all this time is a nice joke in the moment, but also just isn't extremely well. It adds tension, but it isn't an extremely natural way of putting the story forward. I have completely run out of things to say about this episode. I do think that the very end with the pearl stolen by Mr. Krabs being an egg, I feel like that was just added to make it a little more sweet, to end it on a positive note after all this bad vibes. I mean, I think this episode does bad vibes okay, but bad vibes isn't exactly what I'm looking for in SpongeBob. Some of these Patrick's jokes are good. Some of them, like him bombarding over SpongeBob's speech, are a little intrusive. But, yeah, it's an alright episode, even though it isn't totally my cup of tea. And that's where I stand on Pressure and the Smoking Peanut. My question of the week for you last week was something about Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy villains. I'll just look it up now. I think it was about what's your favorite villain in the series. Let me just get it out right now. Yeah. Jack McGinn said that he liked Barnacle Man in the fifth one. Rebel Friend says Man Ray, and Super Seal also says Man Ray. I think my question of the week for you this week is, what is the sweetest ending to a SpongeBob episode? And I'm not just talking about sugary and schmaltzy just for the heck of it. I'm talking about just what do you think was a very satisfying and heartwarming way to end an episode? I know that for me, Sweet Victory and the ending of No Hat for Pat are up there, but for my money, it would have to be the ending of Pizza Delivery, but I'm interested in hearing what your favorites are. And next week, I've got Shanghai, which is my personal favorite episode of the whole show, and also Gary Takes a Bath. I'm going to do them both at once, which I'm going to be quickly dipping my toes into 2003 for that one, so stay tuned for the near 18th anniversary of that episode, and goodbye for now.